In this video, I'm going to teach you my proven blueprint to get fluent in Spanish at any age. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid. I'm 16. I'm fluent in 4 languages, including Spanish. I got conversationally fluent in Spanish at 13 years old with 120 hours of studying. And now I help obsessed Spanish learners just like you reach conversational fluency with my simple methods. Here's my before and after.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
And here are some results of other people who have tried this. This guy's 15, for example.
Quiero aprender español. Pues para mí
Sí.
me gusta jugar el Rocket League para aprender español, así que ya lo sé la palabra de Rocket League.
And using this blueprint, I have been able to save minimum 200 to 250 hours compared to the average learner of time spent studying. And for example, the other transformation that you saw, he's a 15-year-old who saved 200 to 350 hours with this blueprint. So here are the points that we're going to go through. The first is that age is irrelevant. So we'll start there. Let me tell you a quick story. So when I got fluent was around the beginning of 2022. There was this guy in my class who started using Duolingo Plus, and he started getting really, really good at it. I was an A student in basically everything. I had a really good grade, except for Spanish. I had a B in Spanish. And so not only that, but also the fact that he was not a great student and he got an A in Spanish was what initially motivated me to sort of start researching different ways of learning Spanish. And eventually I first started with Duolingo, didn't really make much progress, and I felt I was super frustrated in the beginning. Even though I didn't know what could have been achieved, I knew that there was a better way because on YouTube, I'd seen many people get fluent much quicker. And obviously, I sort of had it in the back of my mind that like, yeah, Duolingo probably doesn't work. Because beforehand, I tried using Duolingo to learn Arabic and I didn't make any progress. Now, okay. And so in my, research of doing different things, and so as I was doing my research, I eventually discovered some of the things we're going to talk about in this blueprint. And apply those concepts. And up until the beginning of the summer, I'd basically been doing grammar. And then when summer started, I made it a goal for myself to become fluent at the end of that summer. And so I'll actually show you the AI analysis of the thing. So before the summer, I had done around 30 hours of studying using this blueprint. And that's not including Duolingo and the wasted time I did, because I did like maybe 2 hours. And then after summer, I did around 120 hours of studying total. So I did around 1 hour a day, which is very conservative. I didn't actually do... I messed around a lot. But to make it simple, I basically did 1 hour a day during the summer for 3 months, basically, equating to 120 hours. And that's when I got fluent. But the key point here is that I was 13 years old. There's this myth. There's this thing that kids are just better at learning languages. And there's very little truth to it. There's some truth to it, okay? So here's the thing, okay? If we split it in half like this and we have kids and adults, okay? The thing is, when it comes to cognitive ability, kids are trash. Like cognitive ability, adults are way better at cognitively demanding things. And obviously, learning a language is one of them. But the reason why we had this impression that kids are better at learning languages is for the other factors that kids have, okay? So adults have some factors that kids are way better in compared to adults. What this means is kids basically have more leverage than adults. And the things that give you leverage are exactly what we're going to cover in this blueprint, okay? Basically, kids have leverage that they apply because they follow the points of this blueprint, but it's not directly because of their age. And so age is actually, for the most part, irrelevant. And I'll give you some proof of this. So I started doing coaching for Spanish around a year ago, I think, around that, maybe 9-10 months ago, okay? And some of the newest clients I've had, just sort of prove this to you, my clients have ranged from anywhere from 15 all the way up to 50s, like literally people in their like early 50s. The idea that age matters is completely irrelevant. And I've seen this myself because some of my best clients have been 40, 50 years old, and some of my worst have been in their mid-20s. And I'm not putting shade to anyone. This was a long time ago, okay? And so not only this, but a lot of people think that if you're too young, you can't learn, and if you're too old, you can't learn. Personally, I myself have become fluent in Spanish, conversationally fluent, in just 120 hours at 13 years old. And so now I'm 16 and I'm a polyglot. And I speak 4 languages fluently. I've had clients who are literally in their 50s who like, I'll show you here, okay? This guy right here, he's in his 50s, okay? Within 3 weeks of me working with him, he had already been able to start speaking in full sentences. And so it's not that you have to be in your mid-20s or you have to be like a teenager like I am in order to learn a language. It's more so there are restraints, there are constraints that are not letting you achieve that goal. And in this video, we're going to obviously cover those. But I just wanted to really cover this initial point that age is irrelevant for the most part. Now, the reason why I say for the most part is kids still have these points here, okay? And we're going to cover these points. But basically, as the adult, you mainly just have the advantage that you are more cognitively like smarter. Like you are able to learn at a faster rate than children. And that being said, the older you grow and the more your brain develops, especially as teenagers and in mid-20s and, as you grow up, your ability does increase, okay? And when you get older and older, that does decrease. So according to the scientific literature, yes, it is harder to learn a language at an older age. But it's not the amount that it actually affects learners isn't at the level that you may think, because the people that ignore those beliefs and actually follow through with the correct steps are the people who are more successful than the guy who's in his 20s learning. In fact, I don't tell this part of the story a lot, but I was actually learning Spanish together with a friend when we were doing Spanish before that summer. And then we made it our goal to get fluent that summer. But then he quit in the beginning of that summer, even though he's just my age and should be the same level of like cognitively smart or whatever the terms are, right? He should have been at the same level of smartness, but he gave up because of other factors. And so the main constraint for people who may be older or younger, or, I'm at the young end, I'm 16, but I've worked with people who are, up in their 50s, their 40s and stuff. And the main constraint for the extremes, right? For basically any adult, right? If you're not a teenager, the main constraint is time. And so to overcome this is going to lead us to the second part of this blueprint, which is what I like to call the Spanish study formula, okay? And so here I just want to cover two main concepts, which are deep work versus shallow work, and then scheduling and planning. Now, I can really relate to this, and I've had a lot of experience with this whole idea of like being able to be as productive as possible. Because here's the thing, okay? As a teenager, I'm just going to be honest, when I was 13 and I was learning Spanish in that summer, I was not productive. Like I was playing games all day. Obviously I could, I'm a teenager, but I wasn't very productive, and I was able to achieve very good results, especially compared to like the average learner. And the same thing with Eduardo, the other client I had who was 15 and got fluent in like a few months as well, right? The thing is, as teenagers, we have that ability to basically, we don't have to care about rent. We don't have to care about like food, and like basically we have all the time in the world. So when you have tons of time, especially as a teenager, when you are a teenager, it's like I could put in 1 hour a day, and all I needed was consistency, and I would still achieve good results because I didn't have stress of anything else. It was the summer, right? So I literally didn't have to worry about anything because I was 13 years old. Now, for a lot of people, especially adults, they obviously have very busy schedules, and I can relate to this now that I've grown up a little. For example, growing this business and balancing school and all this. What matters here is productivity. Now, when it comes to learning Spanish, there is a specific way to be productive, right? And that is leverage, okay? And I'll explain what leverage is, okay? Leverage is where the amount of input that you put, you get out more output. So you can imagine like this like seesaw thing, right? If I'm here, basically what it means is the amount of input that I put in. If I put one sort of thing of effort, like Newton of effort, I get output 3, for example. That's a terrible 3. You get the point. I get out more than you put in. You get out more than you put in, right? There's more leverage to posting on social media than it is to put up flyers, because if you put up a flyer, maybe 10 people in that area will see it. Whereas if you put that same flyer on like social media, 10 million people can see that same thing. So it's basically 10 to 10 million then. Do you get it? So basically it's where the amount of effort that you put in, you get way more out. And that the more effort, the more you get out, the more leverage you have. And so the leverage here is what I like to call deep work versus shallow work, okay? And the whole thing I like to call the Spanish study formula. So as an adult, when you're very busy, or just if you're a busy person in general, right? Anyone can be busy, right? Many of us are very busy, and that might be the constraint for you learning Spanish, right? And if you're wondering, by the way, why I'm not just directly jumping into like the methods, like the fluency equation, the ladders, it's because this is specifically for the people who have been struggling because they think that the constraint is their age, which it might be. And that's why these 2 points, that age is relevant and the Spanish study formula, are very important, okay? Just wanted to say that very quickly. So when you study, basically, when you study Spanish, there are different calibers of work. There are different levels of what is productive, okay? And I like to put them into 2 parts, okay? Now, you might have heard of these 2 concepts. If you have it's because it's from a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. I highly recommend that book, by the way. And it talks about productivity. It talks about how to be productive. And it introduces this concept of deep work, which is what the whole book is about. So deep work is like a block of work where you do the most cognitively demanding task and you basically like completely lock in on that task, okay? So imagine this, right? Have you ever, most people watching, you probably, graduate from school, you've taken a hard test before. Have you ever, like, after you've taken that test, felt like that, like, hurting, aching sort of feeling in your brain, where during the test you were super focused, you were like actually thinking, the cogwheels in your brain were turning, right? And then after the test, your brain started aching a little, and you realize that, like, oh, okay, it's sort of you realize that, like, okay, you've done a very cognitively demanding task, and you've been very productive, obviously, and now your brain has to sort of rest. That work there, the test that you did, is what falls into the category of deep work. Okay, so it's basically these tasks that are very cognitively demanding. Fancy word for just it requires effort. It is hard work, okay? And then there's shallow work. Shallow work is kind of like replying to emails and having meetings, and it's kind of like things that you can do while eating breakfast, It's very shallow. It's very, it's not as cognitively demanding. Now, the concept here of distinguishing these two is that when you are studying Spanish, you'll get the most bang for your buck when you treat it like a deep work task. Spanish studying, by definition, is one of the most cognitively demanding tasks that you can do, because you're literally learning a new code, a new way of expressing yourself, a new logic. It's the equivalent of learning a new programming language. That's why they're called programming languages, right? Python, like that's a whole language that people can communicate in. It's because it's called a programming language because it has its own logic to it. Same thing with Spanish. Spanish has its own logic to it. And so it is, by definition, it is super hard. It's extremely cognitively demanding. You can compare it to coding, right? And so who is the elite coder? Who do you think Google is going to hire? The coder who wakes up and doesn't distract himself, sits down and then puts on like noise-canceling headphones, turns off all like the distracting things, puts his phone away, and then literally sits there on the computer like this and just types away for the next few hours. Versus the coder who is sort of like smoking a cigarette while scrolling on TikTok and then writes a bit of code. Who is Google going to hire, right? And so, of course, it's going to be the one who treats their cognitively demanding work task as a deep work task. And so the thing is, we all have deep work and shallow work. And as, like, if you are, older, or if you are older, right, you have a job, you have like a 9 to 5 or anything, it's like, yes, you have a bunch of deep work and shallow work to do. The idea here is treat learning Spanish like a deep work task, not like a shallow work task. Meaning, I see a bunch of people on like Duolingo scrolling and just like answering those questions. Those are the people that never get fluent. And sadly, that's the majority, right? Whereas I can remember the way I studied and the way that my clients studied who got fluent as well. I sat down, put my phone away, and it was just me and the computer, and I just worked. Okay? And so some quick tips regarding deep work. Don't do it on like a foggy mind. So, do it on like a clear mind, right? If you just came back home from work and you're very tired and your brain is foggy and you're going to get some brain farts, wait like 30 minutes and then start, okay? Second, just be healthy, okay? So basic exercise, basic health, like don't eat McDonald's or something just before studying. That actually, like, people don't understand, but people don't really mention this, but a spike in insulin before doing your work is extremely detrimental to your deep work. And I can say that from personal experience. And finally, prioritize deep work. And to prioritize is to literally put it prior, meaning do deep work prior to the other work, meaning do it early on in the day. And this way you also avoid procrastinating it. And so the second part of this is scheduling and planning. So just like the first thing we said is you want to put it early in the day, but also when you do study Spanish, that you plan when you're going to study Spanish. Most people, especially people who don't get fluent, they usually just like go on Duolingo, scroll for like 30 minutes doing the sort of quizzes, and then that's it. That isn't enough, especially because like they might do it when they're doing work or when they're scrolling on TikTok. It's like, it's very spontaneous. You don't want to be spontaneous when you study. You want to be productive. You want to be planned, right? You want to have a schedule. And so when it comes to scheduling and planning your Spanish study sessions, aka the time that you study and you lock in on your work, it should be firstly in the beginning of the day, or early on in the day. If it's not in the beginning of the day, it's fine, but just make sure when you do it that you actually do it, and that it's not like you're not tired, right? You don't come back from like an 8-hour shift and then you directly start working on this, because you're gonna get brain fog and it's gonna be hard, right? And then also, obviously, making sure that you actually do the work, right? And another tip of deep work is that it only lasts, like, you can only do around 90 minutes of deep work. After that, your brain gets really foggy, okay? You can actually time yourself on that. It's been proven in research as well. In every day, your brain can really only focus for like 4 hours when it comes to like actual cognitively demanding tasks. One final mindset shift that I want you to adopt before we move on to the actual sort of content where we're going to talk about how to study is that consistency always wins, okay? It's better to be more consistent than it is to be more spontaneous, because your brain learns, if you didn't know it, your brain learns through repetitions, and repetitions require consistency. They're like, the word repetition and the word consistency are like deeply connected to each other, because to be consistent is to repeat something on a regular cadence. And so do you see how the word consistency is directly connected to the repetition, right? So you want to be consistent, you want to be repetitive, you want to repeat the same thing on a regular cadence, aka be consistent, right? Okay, so all this is great, right? So far, you know that age is irrelevant, okay? You can be in your 50s, you can be a teenager, right? The goal is still the same, and you'll still achieve the same thing, okay? And you know that we need to prioritize deep work. You know how to do deep work. You know that we need to cut out all distractions, and we need to lock in on the cognitively demanding task. Now, what is the cognitively demanding task? How are we going to study Spanish? And this is where we get into the next 3 points: Spanish versus real Spanish, the fluency equation, and the learn to ladders, okay? So one last thing before we dive in is quality over quantity, but that quantity beats everything. So let me explain. We've all heard of quality over quantity, right? We all know that quality is better than quantity. Okay, quality, quantity. But what people don't really talk about is quality and quantity beats everything. Meaning, okay, you now know that we need to do quantity. We need to have a consistent schedule where we do our deep work blocks. But now I have to talk about quality. How do we achieve quality? Okay, so the biggest constraint that most people are struggling with isn't actually usually their like study schedule, even though that's a big reason. It's actually mostly the method that they use to achieve learning Spanish, okay? In comparison, like I showed you, this way of learning saved me 200 to 250 hours of time of studying as compared to the average learner. Meaning there is a better way to study Spanish, okay? And for my client Eduardo, he saved 200 to 350, right? And so the method matters, okay? Don't let anyone tell you the method doesn't matter. Method, it's never about this like, oh, does this method work? Does this method work? No, everything can work. It's about what works the best, what works the fastest. And in my experience, in my opinion, this is what has worked the best, not only for me, but for other people. So let's talk about Spanish versus real Spanish. Now, most people, they'll try to learn Spanish in this conventional way, and that's why they don't succeed. Now, we've already covered a few reasons why, but it's this main reason right here. Real world Spanish is different to what school and Duolingo and all these platforms have been teaching us, okay? How do Spaniards actually speak? Okay, do they say, hola, yo hablo español? Or do they say, hola, hablo español? How do they speak, right? And actually that difference is much like larger than you think, okay? So if we took, for example, and I have him on screen right here, okay? This is what you think Spanish sounds like. Aquí estoy, escúchame. Es que hay muchos problemas. Right? That's the dreaming Spanish method. That's the Duolingo. But listen to a real native and you'll quickly discover that it's aquí estoy, escúchame. Es que hay mucho problema. And this is so like massive because people don't like, because when I first heard native speak, it I was shell shocked. I was like, what is this? Because I thought it was como estás, but its entire time it was como ta. Now, obviously, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's actually not when you think about it, when you hear it in context, okay? So, real Spanish basically means that we need to study what actual natives are saying. And so here's a list of what natives are saying. This is the main difference, okay? And so when learning Spanish, we're going to learn real Spanish. That is the simplest sort of explanation, okay? Now, let's get into the fluency equation, okay? So we want to have a defined goal. And for you and me, okay, you probably heard me mention that I talked about conversational fluency. And here's what I want to clarify. So when I was doing research on a bunch of different definitions of fluency, all these YouTubers had very different definitions, and it was sort of controversial. It was actually like a controversial thing, which is surprising because most of us sort of know, okay, fluency is fluency. We sort of have that idea. So the main sort of like definition that everyone agrees with is that fluency is defined as being fluent. And that is defined as having fluidity or flow in your speech, right? When you speak, there's a flow. There's a speed going on there, sort of. And so usually it means that you are able to speak effortlessly and articulately. That's what most people sort of think. And when I say most people, I'm talking about like the Oxford definitions and some of the YouTubers I saw, right? But this isn't accurate in relation to actually what what actually most people want to achieve when it comes to fluency. Because if I can speak fast, that doesn't necessitate that I can have conversations and connect with people, which is what most people actually want. And so the best way to define fluency, in my opinion, is to separate them into two categories: conversational fluency and native fluency. So conversational fluency is where you can have a conversation where both parties understand each other and they can have a full conversation. Here's the key difference. The flow, the fluidity, right? The fluency is in the conversation, not necessarily only in your speech. Because think about the quiet kid, right? You know, I've all seen that thing. There's like that quiet person or a shy person. That shy or quiet person doesn't necessarily speak extremely quickly, nor does he like blurt out a ton of words. But he's still fluent in their language, right? Like you can imagine a quiet kid in your classroom or at work, right? That guy is still fluent, of course. He's born and raised in America, or he's born and raised in the US or whatever country, but he probably doesn't speak a lot. And so when you do speak with him, he's still fluent. Why? Because there's still flow, and that flow is not only in his speech, but in the conversation. And a conversation can be simplified into a back and forth. So basically, fluency is being able to have a back and forth with a native. That's what conversational fluency or just regular fluency can be defined as. Now, native fluency is where you're indistinguishable from a native, which means every part of your language, your Spanish, is the same as a native, basically. And that doesn't just include conversations. And so the goal of fluency is being fluent in the context of conversations, meaning conversational fluency. And this matters because of what I call the effort discrepancy. This means that there's a discrepancy between conversational fluency and native fluency relative to the time and effort required versus the results. So for conversational fluency, this amount of effort took me 120 hours studying, spread across 5 to 6 months, right? And I got most of the results after the summer of 2022 when I was able to be conversationally fluent. Okay, this is something I'm still working on, and I probably I'll never get the same amount of results as I did from conversational fluency, because this was able to get me the ability to connect with natives, make friends, and be able to like scroll on TikTok on Spanish and discover a whole new world when it comes to memes and just a whole new world, right? Because it is a whole new world. The Spanish world is a whole new world. But native fluency is still something that I haven't achieved yet, whereas this is something I achieved within a few months. And so this is the time and effort that we are focusing on. And so putting fluency into a formula or an equation, this is what it looks like. And this is the goal this is what I like to call it my fundamental niche. This is what I teach, okay? This is what my program completely prioritizes. And if you're interested, you can check the description, by the way. So fluency can be defined as speaking multiplied by understanding, meaning fluency is conversational fluency. What are the two skills that are being used in a conversation? Think about it. It's I speak and then you understand me and then we switch. You're speaking and I'm understanding you. Meaning the only two skills being used are your ability to speak and your ability to understand audible speech. Okay? Now take this one step further. Because we want to learn real Spanish, we want to speak real Spanish. So we want to speak with the same or similar accent to what the native speaks. And we want to be able to understand the native, basically real Spanish, because we want to develop real Spanish fluency. Okay? That is the fluency equation, meaning every single time we study Spanish, we are going to be speaking and understanding. And anything that doesn't fall into this category is fundamentally a constraint. It is fundamentally not helping you as much to achieve your goal of conversational fluency. It's the same idea of like if this part of the equation said we want abs, then this part of the equation should say do ab exercises and eat healthy, for example, right? And so you could also add doing bicep curls, but that won't be conducive to you achieving the goal of getting abs, for example, right? I think we all understand that example. And a lot of times people add to this side of the equation, they add like stuff that literally hurts their progress, such as like learning slow Spanish, right? I get a lot of criticism for not promoting like dreaming Spanish. And the reason why is because they teach you slow Spanish, and our goal was never to learn slow Spanish, right? Obviously, do whatever you want, but I'm here to help the people who actually want to achieve conversational fluency. Furthermore, Spanish by itself, so we know that we need to be speaking and understanding Spanish, but what even is Spanish? Spanish can be defined as grammar and vocabulary. Very simple, right? Vocabulary is the words, and grammar is like the logic behind the words, okay? So, ¿cómo estás is vocabulary, and the why behind ¿cómo estás, the grammar, is the logic, okay? And actually, grammar is the logic, the most important part of learning Spanish, which is why when I teach Spanish, I teach grammar first, okay? And that's also what I did when I first learned Spanish. I went through a course called Language Transfer to study grammar. Anytime anyone ever got fluent in any language was through this equation, because fundamentally, a conversation only includes these two skills, which means fundamentally, like factually to the universe, you cannot be conversationally fluent if you haven't developed these two skills. And that is a plain fact of the universe. And if you're arguing against that, it's the equivalent to argue against gravity. You're probably not going to win that argument. So now let's talk about the LUR and SUR ladders. So now the question becomes, okay, we know that we need to be implementing speaking multiplied by understanding real Spanish in order to achieve fluency. So how do we improve the skills of speaking and understanding spoken Spanish? And the answer to that question is extremely simple. By speaking and understanding spoken Spanish. You want stronger abs? Go train your abs. Do you want bigger legs? Probably train your legs and eat a diet that is conducive to growing the legs, right? Those are just fancy words for saying you want something, do the thing that gets you there. And the thing that gets you there is the thing that you want. If you want to get better at swimming, you probably need to swim more. And you get better at speaking and understanding Spanish by speaking and understanding Spanish. And so to sort of prove this a little more, you get better at understanding spoken Spanish by listening to spoken Spanish, trying to understand that spoken Spanish, and then repeating, okay? And that's what I call LUR. Listen, understand, repeat. And to get better at speaking Spanish, we have to speak Spanish, understand how to say something in Spanish, because you probably don't know how to speak Spanish, so we need to move on to the next step, which is to know how to say something. And then we'll go back to saying that thing, so repeat. So, SUR, speak, understand, repeat. And so this is what they look like visually. You listen, understand, repeat, speak, understand, and repeat, okay? This is just what the fluency equation looks like visually, okay? So if you want to know how to implement the fluency equation, this is how you do it, okay? And so fluency is at the top of these ladders, okay? This is what my client Eduardo did to get fluent. He got fluent in a few months. This is what I did to get fluent. And this is what others have been doing to reach their goals. And so anytime anyone ever got fluent was to start climbing these two ladders, okay? So here's a summary of what we've covered. Firstly, age is irrelevant, okay? There are people who are 13 who have gotten fluent, people who are in their 60s who have gotten fluent. Don't make an excuse for yourself. Don't make this false belief that it doesn't work because of your age. Age is not a constraint. What are constraints are the things that follow because of age, but not the age itself. And what follows is not being able to put time and effort, not being able to allocate the time and productive time, as a matter of fact, to learning Spanish. And that's where we solve the next issue, which is using the Spanish study formula, where we study deep work and we schedule and plan our deep work sessions when we study Spanish so that our work and our busyness basically doesn't get into the way of our Spanish studying. But then the question becomes, how do we study Spanish? And it follows these three steps. We want to study real Spanish. We want to study Spanish by speaking and understanding Spanish. And we want to do that by repeating the steps LUR and SUR. And that is my proven blueprint to becoming fluent in Spanish at any age. This is all just a small piece from my program, and so if you want to implement these frameworks and finally learn Spanish in a clear, structured way, then check the description to join my program. But act now, because I don't know when the price is going to increase. So if you want to lock in your price now, then check the description. Otherwise, I have a free gift for you. Just because you stayed all the way to the end, which I really, really appreciate. You can check the description or the pinned comment and you can grab my free, easy to use Cognate cheat sheet where you'll instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words and you don't need to opt in your email or anything. You just get it. You literally click on the link and then boom, you have the cheat sheet. And it's totally free and yours instantly, okay? Otherwise, I would really appreciate it if you share this video with others who you think would benefit. Hope you enjoyed and stay humble.